everyone, and welcome back to Joey's Retro Handhelds. I'm Joey, and today we're going to be doing a showcase of different emulators and retro game performance that you can get on a modded Nintendo Switch. Now, I have the white OLED model here that I purchased pre-modded about a year ago. For anyone that isn't aware, all models of Nintendo Switch can be modded. However, only the version 1 Switch can be modded easily with just a small little jig. Version 2, Lite, and OLED all require a mod chip soldered onto the back, so a bit more involved. It's not something I was comfortable doing, and so I bought mine pre-modded. But you can also get the mod chips yourself and have a local company solder them. Anyway, not the point of the video, but just wanted to share how we get to this point. So, with a modded Switch, we can now add new emulators and programs. I'll be using RetroArch for most systems, then standalone DuckStation for PS1, PPSSPP for PSP, and Melon DS for DS. Lastly, there's a Patreon exclusive Citra RetroArch core for 3DS that I'll also be showing off. One important thing to mention is that as of right now, version 1 Switches also have the ability to boot into Android, which opens up a whole world of options. For example, Drastic for Nintendo DS, Dolphin for GameCube and Wii, and Citra MMJ for 3DS. Now, I've seen some people say that they've gotten GameCube games to work really well, as you'll see on screen. This makes me super excited to test it as well. Either way, unfortunately, Android isn't available on the OLED model I have right now, so I won't be able to show it off today. I will definitely do so when they release it for my device though. Let's jump right in and start with Arcade, running the Final Burn Neo core in RetroArch. Showing off Shinobi and The Simpsons here, this is going to run true for a bunch of these next systems, but they all run great on the Switch. No issues or concerns, just perfect. For NES, we're going to be using the Nostopia UE core for RetroArch, and the problem most people are going to have with these systems is the aspect ratio and the black bars on the side. Honestly, if you can get over that, the OLED screen is just going to make this fantastic to play on. For SNES, we're going to be using the SNES 9X current core for RetroArch, and I forgot to mention, but for achievement hunters, there's retro achievements available here as well. And so you're not really losing anything by emulating these games on the Switch, compared to normal handhelds that we're used to. Game Boy and Game Boy Color are going to be more of the same, and we're using the Gambate core here for RetroArch. Honestly, these will run on anything, so not much to say about them. Game Boy Advance's 3:2 aspect ratio helps a lot in removing the black bars here, as you can see, and just looks and feels fantastic. This is with the MGBA core as well, which is usually a little bit more resource intensive, and I've had no issues running any Game Boy Advance games on this system. For Genesis, we're using the Genesis Plus GX core for RetroArch, and I wasn't a Genesis guy growing up, so being able to go back and play games like Adventure of Batman is a great advantage. Same thing with Sonic and other Genesis games as well, as you'll see here. Moving on to DS, we're going to be using the Melon DS standalone application. And so I have an overclock of 1581 MHz for CPU. Nothing dangerous about it, DS just needs it to run well. For reference, the Switch CPU runs at 1020 MHz for both docked and handheld as default. So just a small overclock. In-game, ZL and ZR bring up the pause menu, and R3 swaps screens. DS is on the fringe of what runs well on this device, as I've seen some DS games have some slowdown and issues. Last on the list of consoles that run great and absolutely perfectly, we're using the DuckStation standalone here for PS1. And so this is PS1 with a 3x upscale to 720p using the hardware renderer and PGXP geometry correction. As you can see, we have zero issues running at these settings. Fully expect some games might need us to drop down on the upscaling a bit, but otherwise the Switch runs PS1 really well, and games look gorgeous on the OLED screen. Especially one of my favorite games of all time, Harvest Moon: Back to Nature. One thing missing here is that DuckStation standalone does not have retro achievement support, so just keep that in mind. And now, let's look at systems that don't run well, or need some added tweaks and overclocking to be able to be semi-playable. Starting with Dreamcast, and this is the Flycast core for RetroArch, Crazy Taxi is not running at a steady frame rate at all. Dips quite a bit and isn't a great way to play the system. I'd imagine some games could run well here, but I'd look elsewhere if you wanted Dreamcast. Going on to N64, and we're using the Mupen 64 Plus Next core for RetroArch. It's a bit better than Dreamcast. Some games will easily be playable here at a full frame rate for most of the game. Mario Kart 64 being a good example. But then, moving on into something like Smash Remix, there's stutters, and while it's definitely playable, it's not a super enjoyable experience. So Nintendo 64 as a whole is going to be a little bit of a mixed bag depending on what games you're going to be playing. Continuing on with the theme of mixed bag, PSP, which is using the PPSSPP standalone app, is all over the place in terms of performance. The first game I tested was Gran Turismo, and it wasn't playable. Here, have a listen. But this changes as we go to other games. This is Jak and Daxter running at a 2x resolution, and as you can see, it actually runs well and sticks to that 30 frame rate cap. There's some very minor dips, but otherwise it's extremely playable.
And then press the button in the air, you'll get some extra hand time.
More of the same with Final Fantasy Tactics War of the Lions, where there are actual frame rate dips, but they aren't felt because it's a strategy RPG. And so, similar case with GND-ARC. I'd say PSP is definitely playable in certain circumstances and with certain games, so it really just depends on you. Last on the list is 3DS, and here's Pokemon Y. This core crashed quite a bit. I mean, a lot. The black screen was new, so I'll take it. But when we aren't getting a black screen or crashing, here's Fire Emblem Awakening's intro video. Have a listen. Okay, so past that, the game ran fine. I mean, it's not great, and you could play it this way, I guess, but it's deceptive.
On my mark.
Here's Ocarina of Time 3D, and I mean, the frame rate isn't terrible, it feels decently smooth, but there's just enough random stuttering, audio issues, and slowdown to make you nauseous. So yeah, 3DS isn't ready. I know this is still being developed though, and we might actually see something playable here in the near future. So as you can see, the Switch is a pretty good emulation system, especially when you factor in the easy docking aspect to get these games directly onto your TV. It struggles with some systems, but for the most part runs a lot of games really well. And if you're going handheld, the OLED screen is one of my favorite ways to play non-demanding retro games. I wouldn't go out and buy one for this purpose, but if you have one, it may be worth it to mod it and get these games running yourself. For version 1 Switches, it's really easy. Just need a $10 jig and off you go. But for everybody else, you're going to need that hard mod, and that's something that's a little bit more difficult. That's all for this one. Hope you liked the video, and hope you all have a good one.